What is up, everyone? Welcome to this is not Gentlemen of the Corax. This is Elasmocast. You may recognize this guest from Gentlemen of the Corax, though. Today we have Meaghan Sorce. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me back. Actually, this
Yeah,
is my first time on Elasmocast, so I'm very excited.
yeah. For those that don't know my other podcast, Gentlemen of the Corax, Megan's been on a couple times, and she specializes in deep sea organisms, particularly the fish and the sharks, which we'll be focusing on today. So, before we get into all of that cool stuff, tell us a little bit about your background and what you're interested in studying.
So my background is I have a master's in ecosystem ecology from Harvard University. I'm currently I'm still at Harvard. I work at Harvard University Museum of Comparative Zoology in the Ichthyology collection. I've been there for 10 years. And yeah, I focus on deep sea stuff and sharks and perfect deep sea sharks.
Yeah, deep sea sharks are some of the coolest animals, in my opinion, on Earth. Everyone gives credit to like the great white as being such a really cool animal, and then like the makos and all of this stuff. But things don't really get super weird until you go into the deep sea. And we'll be focusing on a particular area within the deep sea environments that is the essence of bioluminescence. So, what is bioluminescence and what are the mechanisms of it?
So this is can get really complicated, especially if you don't really understand chemistry, which I am not a chemist. But basically, bioluminescence is just it's the production of light by living organism. So it's basically happens when through to release chemical reaction. So there are a couple different mechanisms or ways that different animals emit that bioluminescence. There's bacteriogenic, that's produced by like a symbiotic bacteria. And then there's autogenic, which occurs when the animal itself is producing its own light through to their metabolic processes. But in most cases, though, it's due to the symbiotic bacteria, and it involves a substance called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. And yeah, it's been around for a long time. So I think it's first evolved during the Cambrian period. So that's around like I think it was like 540 million years ago. So it's independently evolved depending on who you ask, like 40 through 100 different times. And it's terrestrial, it's aquatic, it's shallow water, deep water. It's a pretty
Yeah.
important thing in nature. So
Yeah, and we do see a large prevalence of this in deep sea environments. And it is really cool that this phenomenon has evolved convergently throughout so many different lineages that are so unique from one another. So, what are some of the uses that organisms have with bioluminescence?
there are a lot of uses. So I feel like primarily the things that like when most famously, I think when we think of like deep sea bioluminescence, we tend to think of anglerfish, which have the bioluminescent lure, which they use to attract prey. So attracting prey is a really big thing. Also signaling mates. So on land, we see fireflies or lightning bugs. They're autogenic. Their bioluminescence is autogenic, so they're actually producing their own light. They're not using a symbiotic bacteria. But then so there's some interesting mushrooms that actually glow. So when an animal comes over to them interested in the glow, it gets their spores on that other animal and they're walking around spreading their spores. There's so many uses. I could go on for a long time. There's a shrimp that shoots out like a bioluminescent ooze, and just like how a magician will like create a cloud of smoke so it can disappear. It can basically is like a diversion so the shrimp can swim away. And yeah, But I think probably the thing that we're going to be probably talking most about is actually counter illumination. So similar to counter shading in the shallow water, you mentioned great white sharks. One of the reasons they're called that is because they have that really white stomach, which makes it so when an animal's looking up at them, they're blending in with the ambient light. They're not casting a silhouette. And then if you're looking from above and you look down, they're blending in with like the deep. So that is something that you see a lot in the deep sea. You see bioluminescent photophores on their ventral side, and that is creating exactly the same effect that we see in shallow water, but it's called counter illumination instead of counter shading.
Hmm. And let's talk about some of the organisms that have this trait. We'll get into the sharks in a second, but I feel like bioluminescence is so cool with a wide variety of different animals, not just sharks, as much as they're my favorite things.
So there are like we can think of like cnidarians, like we see that there are corals that are bioluminescent, there are jellyfish that are incredibly beautiful bioluminescent animals there. Like I said, there's several crustaceans, there's dinoflagellants, there's bacteria. It really just occurs all over the animal kingdom. So many fish are bioluminescent. In the deep sea, I think the percentage of animals that are bioluminescent is something like 80%. So that really gives this, it just really drives home how important this evolutionary character is in the environment, especially when we're looking once we get to the real deep dark places.
Mhm. Awesome. And when we're talking about sharks with bioluminescence, there really isn't a large number of them that are alive today that have it. So let's talk about some of the sharks that do have it that are around today.
So there's only 57 described species. That doesn't mean that's all the species that are out there, but those are the species that we have actually described. And they are all squaliforms, which we're going to talk about later, kind of the evolutionary lineages of sharks and these sharks in particular. But there are only three families of sharks where all of these bioluminescence sharks occur, and that's Etmopteridae. So those are like the lantern sharks. I love lantern sharks. Then Dalatiidae. So I think the famous shark in that, most famous shark is probably the Cookiecutter shark. But the another shark is the Kitefin shark, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. And then Symniosidae. So that's the I think it's I can't remember the common name of them. I think it's the velvet shark or the velvet. It is a sleeper shark. It's like I think it's one of the only sleeper sharks that is bioluminescent.
Oh, the velvet dogfish.
The velvet
Yeah.
dogfish, right. Not to be confused with the velvet belly lantern shark, which is an Etmopterid.
Hmm. Yeah, and for
Common
those,
names are so confusing.
yeah, well, common names are a little bit of an issue when people talk about sharks, just because every different region might have a different common name for something. Like we see that with the great white shark. A lot of people call them white sharks now. In Australia, they call them white pointers. They call them something else, I think, in South Africa. I forgot what that one is. But yeah. And when we're talking about squaliforms, the common name for those is the dogfish. So these tend to be a lot more common when we think of dogfish as in like a whole. But when we think of what's bioluminescent, there's only a few families of them, which we talked about, and they're all really deep sea based. So like the more common dogfish species like Squalus acanthius, the spiny dogfish, those aren't bioluminescent. But yeah, so when we're looking at these bioluminescent sharks, what kind of sets them apart, I guess, physiologically from some of the other members of squaliforms?
So one thing that you see in deep sea sharks in general, well, not in, there's some exceptions, is a lot of most deep sea sharks and a lot of fishes in general tend to be much darker in coloration, and that is so they're harder to see. I said there are some exceptions in deep sea sharks, being so dark, and that is the frilled shark and the goblin shark, which both are pretty pale. There's always an exception to every rule. Another thing you see in deep sea sharks is their dorsal fin. It tends to be is farther back. They tend to have more elongate tails. They tend to just be a little bit stretched out in general because it's kind of the body form that's best for when you're trying to conserve energy because they get to make these really like short fluid motion because you got to figure they still are eating less even though they are sharks. They don't have the same abundance of food that is in the shallower waters. Um, Another huge difference that I'm really fascinated in is their eyes. Their eyes are capable of really taking in a lot more light than what you see in the shallow water, which is why sometimes when you look at deep sea sharks and that, like when they're either in or out of the water, the shark's eyes almost glow, which
Hmm.
it's so they glow either bright green or sometimes there's a few Centrophorus species that glow gold, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really, really crazy animals. And I guess the first one that I think we should talk about within these glow-in-the-dark sharks is Trigonognathus, the paper dogfish. We've talked about this one before in one of the Gentlemen of the Corax episodes, a Creatures of the Deep episode, but I just think that these are the wildest shark that's alive today. You have a protruding jaw that kind of reminds you of the goblin shark, a deep sea lamniform, but they have these really interesting fang-like teeth that you don't really see in anything else within the squaliforms, and that's another rare feature within Squalimorphi, which is basically the group that contains the squaliforms as well as other shark groups like the angel sharks, the cow sharks, the saw sharks, things like that. But anyways, they have these really cool protruding jaws, and their underbellies are bioluminescent on those, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's also interesting to note that they're Etmopterids, so they are related to the lantern shark. So if you look at them superficially, they do kind of have similar, like a lot of similarities. They have like kind of a more blunted rostrum. They're small, which is kind of the biggest similarity. But yeah, it's really that jaw, and there's no other Etmopterid that has that unique morphology of jaw and dentition. It's completely different. It's remarkable to think that they're in the same family.
Yeah. And what are some of the key traits of the Etmopterids?
So I think so the smallest shark is currently described as a lantern shark. It's Etmopterus perrii. It's the dwarf lantern shark. So one of the biggest features is that they're really tiny. They're very, very small. So I think the Etmopterus perrii only reaches it's less than 9 inches. So I think that that's like a really interesting thing where you have these almost voracious predators that, we think of the great white shark, and then like we have these little voracious predators that are only this big. Um, but I think also like just like these other deep sea sharks that we're talking about is they're when it comes to bioluminescence, they have that counter illumination. So their ventral side is covered in photophores, which are their light emitting organs. So it's just like counter shading when you're underneath these little guys. They're not really casting you're not really getting that silhouette that's making it so other predators can potentially pick them out really easily.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting that we have the smallest shark alive today at being around 9 inches, but when we go back into deep time, a lot of the chondrichthyans that we know from more articulated remains For people that don't know, chondrichthyans are cartilaginous, so they don't preserve very well in the fossil record. But we have articulated remains of several chondrichthyans throughout deep time that are much, much smaller than that. But when we look at today, you're looking at around 9 inches being the smallest shark. I just find that really cool.
That is really cool, and it makes you just really wonder kind of about like what changes occurred, between now and then and like the different environmental pressures that cause such drastic, changes.
Yeah. And when we think ecologically, a lot of what chondrichthyans, a lot of their niches back in the Paleozoic is what the ray-finned fish are now. So they
Hmm.
kind of have swapped roles in a way. So nowadays you have these ray-finned fish um, that have filled, I guess, all of these different like reef systems and things like that as the predominant group over there. Whereas if we go back to say like the Carboniferous, for example, those reefs would have been littered with a lot of sharks and or I
Hmm.
guess shark relatives. You'd be
Hmm.
seeing a lot of halocephalans, which are ratfish and kin. You'd see some other extinct groups such as the tenacants, for example, which would probably be um, ecologically equivalent to what we would have today with like the great white shark, for example. But you had a much larger diversity of chondrichthyans back then, at least on the larger phylogenet or the larger taxonomic levels, rather than
Hmm.
what we have now. Now we have really good species diversity, and especially within squaliforms too. We have a staggering diversity of species. But when we look at like the broader phylums, we had a lot more back then.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, but there have been so many changes in like the ocean environment in general, the whole like depths have changed and, reef systems, and it just changed a lot of available niches in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. And especially when we look at larger trophic levels or higher trophic levels, the introduction of tetrapods back into the water, I think, really affected that too. Like
Absolutely.
we saw like a huge struggle in the Cretaceous for sharks that were just starting to become these apex predators
Yep.
with marine animals such as like pliosaurs, later on in the Cretaceous, mosasaurs. And then when we look in the Cenozoic, we have whales, which are, I think, the biggest group that would be applicable for that.
Hmm.
There's a lot of studies that have been done recently on orcas killing off great whites,
Oh
which
yeah.
is something that's really mind-boggling when you think about because we often perceive the great whites as like the apex predator in modern day oceans, but when we look at orcas, it's clearly them.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I mean, with how intelligent they are and the fact that they can work together, I think working together combined with that intelligence, nothing else stands a chance.
For sure, yeah. And
Not yachts, apparently.
And there are some really large squaliforms alive today. The biggest, at least the most popular one, being the Greenland shark, Somniosis microcephalus. And that's a really interesting one. A lot of work has been done on them based on dating them because they're apparently the oldest living vertebrate with some age ranges, I think averaging at like 393 million years or so, but some estimates spanning much larger
Hmm.
than that. So these are also within Somniosidae, which we do have as we said before, the velvet dogfish, I believe, being a
Hmm.
bioluminescent animal. So I guess a good question is why is the Greenland shark not bioluminescent when we have a bioluminescent member of that family?
That's a great question. And I would bet that the answer to that would be based on their different feeding styles. So Greenland sharks and the other big kind of like when you think of like sleeper sharks, they're more so scavengers. So they have been like I think there was a Greenland shark that was found has been found to have like moose heads and like anything that's pretty much edible in front of them, they will scavenge on. And you got to figure there's very slow moving, which aids in, basically energy consumption and aids in basically them living for a really long time. But they're also almost completely blind due to their eyes being parasitized by, yeah, if you look at photos, they look rough.
Hmm.
Um, so when you have something that, can't move fast, can't see, and, if you're just a scavenger, they have very highly developed olfactory systems. So being bioluminescent for them really wouldn't help them.
Yeah. And they're also at a much higher trophic level too than a lot of these small deep sea animals. So
Mhm.
they don't really have to, I guess, worry as much about hiding than like
Yeah.
a shark that's this big does,
Yeah, nothing's going to eat a massive Greenland shark or,
except people
yeah, except people.
and
Yeah.
dogs.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the other taxa that are bioluminescent. So we talked about Trigonognathus, we talked about some of the lantern sharks. I think that one shark that a lot of people don't really know of as bioluminescent, but is the cookie cutter shark.
I love the cookie cutter shark for so many reasons. On like when you look at their body type, they do look sort of similar to lantern sharks, but that's really, I mean, they're living in the same environment basically. But one of the things that I love the most about them is what I refer to as their bow tie. So they have this dark band that goes, it's right above their head and it goes all the way around their ventral side, around to their lateral, just a full ring around it. And it's the only part of its ventral side that's not bioluminescent. So just like these other sharks we're talking about, they have the ventral bioluminescent photophores, just like we're talking about in counter illumination. And one of the theories behind this dark band and it kind of breaking up that bioluminescent ventral side is that when looking at it from above or below, it will look like, okay, something important I forgot to mention is cookie cutter shark school.
Hmm.
So they're not just swimming around like a one-off shark. They form schools. So looking like a school of really small fish doesn't necessarily make them seem like a threat. But when something swims near them, they will all break off from their school and attach on to this prey. But their prey isn't just little fish. Their prey is sharks. Their prey is whales, dolphins, tuna, bromid, so pomfrets. These big, big
Submarines.
animals that aren't used to having these, being, made prey to other animals, especially not like a little itty bitty shark. But they have an incredible jaw structure. Basically, their lower jaw, all their teeth are fused. So where that cookie cutter name comes from is that when they find prey, they will latch on and shove their teeth in and kind of twist like this, just how you would make a cookie, and it cuts out this almost perfectly spherical chunk of flesh. It's really, really remarkable to look at photos of animals that have been preyed upon by cookie cutter sharks. It it looks so painful, and especially when you can see that a school has kind of gotten to one. I've seen like photos of I think it was a sailfish or a marlin where like the whole side was just completely bit up.
That sounds horrifying.
And yeah, and people have actually been bit by cookie cutter sharks. Like there have been cases of long distance swimmers that off Hawaii that have been swimming at night. Yeah, no thanks. And have had cookie cutter sharks actually attack them. Because a lot of animals in the deep sea will actually kind of make their way up to shallower waters at night, and that is basically the largest migration that occurs on Earth. It's the diurnal migration. You get all these creatures coming up, and a lot of predators are opportunistic and will come up and feed on stuff. And sometimes there's a swimmer.
And they also lose their entire lower row of teeth, correct?
Yeah, they'll lose that entire row of teeth all at once, and it is pretty well supported that they actually eat that row of teeth afterwards. Because you have to figure, imagine the amount of energy it takes to grow an entire row of teeth. So being able to reabsorb all of the nutrients that was in that row of the heat that you're shedding has to be just, a real benefit. I know that there have been instances, I think, of some crabs eating their molts. It's just a way to kind of replenish those nutrients. Um, I actually saw a specimen yesterday in our collection that had a brand new, like, a brand new set of teeth on their lower jaw, not a single chip on it. It was like just came from the dentist. It was incredible because a lot of times our cookie cutter specimens, when I look at their teeth, they're all chipped up because they have been, preying on things and breaking off tips of their teeth. Their teeth are very, very thin and they're very flat. They're flatter than a lot of other shark teeth that tend to be more like convex in the back and flatter on the front. These guys have teeth that are flat on both sides, so it's pretty easy for them to break them, but they have other rows just lined up right behind them.
Hmm. And the Kitefin sharks do the same thing too, right? With their teeth.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So let's talk
So
about the Kitefin sharks, because
yeah.
those are the largest bioluminescent vertebrate alive today, right?
Yes. Yep. They get to be about 5 feet long, and they were the first documented bioluminescent shark. um, which I mean makes sense. We're more likely to run into something pretty large, I guess, maybe. I don't know. Um, but yeah, they were the first bioluminescent shark captured on video.
Hmm. And their wounds, don't those also resemble a cookie cutter as well, or are they different?
They they resemble they're a little more elongated than cookie cutter sharks. Their teeth are almost exactly the same. Same. I'm not sure if they school though. I don't know. In all of the video footage I've seen of them, they've been by themselves. As opposed to with cookie cutter sharks, it's very supported that they are in schools based upon seeing their basically the aftermath of their attacks.
Hmm. Yeah. And with that, I think, especially talking about their teeth, I think that it would be important to talk about the fossil record of the squaliforms and these bioluminescent families. So when we look at squaliform teeth, they have this really unique structure. The more derived ones, like these deep sea ones, they tend to have a more elongated tooth base or root, and they have a really cool uvula that extends down, and they're really well um, fastened into the jaw, which is different than a lot of other sharks that have a much smaller tooth base.
Hmm?
And when we look at the fossil record of squaliforms, it really goes back into the early Cretaceous or the Barremian, which is really far back. That's going to be around 121 to around 125, 126 million years old when we look at when these first squaliforms were around. And it was of the genus Protosqualus, which their teeth really resemble squalus. So I guess the more basal tooth design, not like these really strongly rooted teeth like we see with Somniosis or Dalatias, for example.
Mhm.
So we see those, and then by the late Cretaceous, that's when we see all of these bioluminescent families start emerging. With the late Cretaceous, we have some Dalatiids such as Hesinodon, which is from the Campanian of Hornby Island, which is a really cool site because this is a deep water site that we have multiple taxa of different genera of Chlamydoselachids, which is really cool. Multiple different cow sharks from there,
Mhm.
and you have these early Dalatiids too from Hesinodon. When we look at Somniosidae, we have Cretaskimnus, which was around within the Cretaceous, and then Etmopteridae, there's Proetmopterus and Eoetmopterus, which are around in the late Cretaceous, and it's really really cool. And what we know of with these is pretty much their teeth, because like as
Mhm.
we've said before, cartilaginous skeletons don't preserve well, and a lot of these squaliforms, they tend to be pretty rare in the fossil record, especially the bioluminescent ones, because they're of their deep sea environments. Finding fossils of them, you would need to find basically a deep sea environment that was around back in the Cretaceous,
Yep.
which there's not a ton of them because a lot of deep sea environments are still deep sea now.
Mhm.
So it really definitely adds some, I guess, sample bias when we're trying to study early squaliforms.
Also, when thinking about like something that you made me think of just now and thinking about sample bias is with deep sea organisms, it's really hard to really know what the actual population size of these animals are, which makes it really hard to put conservation methods into place for these animals because we really don't know how many there are. Like, I mean, they've been observed so few times. Part of that is due to our, technology, where only recently have we really been able to, go and actually observe things in the deep sea. And even then, we are limited because we still have to put down these large machines that create light, create noise, disrupt magnetic fields. It's like we are limited by the technology of our time. I think Tony Stark's dad said that. But there really is just no way to get a real grasp on the population of these animals.
Yeah. And it's also very expensive too to study deep sea animals compared to if we're just studying some shallow marine fauna.
Yeah.
We really require special equipment to be able to go down there.
Yep.
And then a lot of the deep sea organisms that we find that like do venture up to shallow water, a lot of times they wind up being sick, or a lot of them wind up dead
Yep.
upon capture. And it definitely is a challenge.
And
And
it's dangerous, it's really dangerous as we've seen, every time you go into an extreme environment, you are risking your life.
yeah,
No matter how trained you are, no matter how much funding you have, no matter, how great your equipment is, it's still not for the faint of heart.
yeah. And talk about some of the pressures that are dealt with by going down that deep.
So there's a lot of pressures. I mean, one thing that is fairly unique about a lot of cartilaginous, or not cartilaginous, but like deep sea animals is that because of the pressure, a lot of things tend to be very gelatinous
Hmm.
because that allows them to kind of deal with the changes in pressure. If they are an animal that goes up and down, for instance, you would be getting compressed as you move down and then, inflate slightly as you move up. But and that could be a lot of pressure on your organs, a lot of pressure on any skeletal system you have. But when you have a little bit more of a leeway, basically, by being gelatinous, that is very beneficial. Some animals have swim bladders, which basically are a form of a way to control your buoyancy. Sharks don't have that. Sharks just have really, really oily livers, which can aid in basically helping their buoyancy. Also, their pectoral fins kind of help them give them lift. So
Mhm.
they similar to an airplane, which helps keep them from sinking. Um, so those are kind of some of the big dangers basically you have facing these deep sea animals as far as changing pressures and changing depths. It's also really cold down there. So you have to have an animal that can take, this extreme cold.
Mhm.
There are shallow water animals, for instance, that do very, very deep dives. And the more we study them, the more we're finding some deep sea animals that are some animals that go to the deep sea that are partially endothermic. So they're partially warm-blooded. Like we see that with tuna and some sharks that do some deep dives, such as mako sharks. Um, or they're regionally endothermic. I think the only full warm-blooded fish that we know of right now is the opah.
Mhm.
Weird fish.
And you've dealt with a lot of these sharks, like the actual specimens of them. What's the texture like on some of these deep sea sharks?
So the fish that we're talking about today, a lot of these bioluminescent deep sea sharks, they are very, very rough. So sharks are covered in these tiny, I want to say they're tooth-like structures, because if you look at them, a lot of them do look like teeth. And there's a lot of theories about how teeth evolved. It could have been from denticles, it could have been from teeth inside the throat, but they're covered in these little teeth-like structures that when you feel, it's like when you feel a shark one way, they feel semi-smooth, but if you were to run your hand the opposite direction, you can take the skin right off your hand. I have lost a lot of skin from touching sharks the wrong way or having even a live shark when I've been tagging them, having them rub up against me. I have gotten shark burn from that. There are a few deep sea sharks that are fairly smooth. We talked about the goblin shark and the frilled shark. They have very small denticles, so you can still feel that they have like a rough texture, but it's nothing like if you run your hands across a Dalatias. Dalatias are very, very rough.
Hmm. Yeah, there's for those that don't know, when we're looking at studying like the earliest of chondrichthyan teeth, like you said before, the hypothesis that teeth arose from denticles. There's a lot of research that's been coming out lately on these odontodes, which are these very tooth-like denticles that, especially when we're looking at acanthodians, which are stem chondrichthyans now, we're looking at the evolution of those teeth, and you have these denticles that bear, pretty surprising resemblances to teeth.
Hmm.
And I find it really fascinating too when we look at teeth that there's a very strong chance that chondrichthyan teeth evolved independently from the bony fish teeth, which leads, to us and everything like that. But the mechanisms for our teeth and shark teeth are very different too. Like
Hmm.
our teeth are like firmly rooted into our jaws, whereas sharks, their teeth are attached very, I guess, loosely. They're not like fixed into the
Yeah.
tooth as much as they're attached onto the jaw itself, which really helps them when they have all of these teeth just getting constantly replaced throughout their lives.
Mhm. Yeah, if you look at the inside of a shark jaw, it's like a conveyor belt of teeth. It's really, really interesting looking at like dilated teeth because you can really see just like those rows on top of each other. Like, oh, really, really cool. And I think the estimate of sharks replace or lose and replace like 35,000 teeth in their lifetime. And that's one of the reasons why, when we're people who look for fossils, shark teeth are one of the things that people find a lot of because, they're constantly dropping their teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, these squaliforms that we're talking about tend not to be as common as, say, a lot of the animals that are alive today that are more shallow water. So like if you're like beachcombing and stuff, the odds of you finding a Dalatius tooth are quite low. But if you want to find like a sand tiger tooth or a bull shark tooth, that's definitely a lot more viable of a
Absolutely.
find for sure.
Yeah.
At least depending where you're at.
I would love to find a cookie cutter shark tooth.
They find them in Florida in certain
Yep.
sites. The odds of finding one just beachcombing is pretty low, but
Oh yeah.
you yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of these teeth, like cookie cutters, for example, they'd, I guess, be classified as micro teeth. So a lot
Yep.
of those would be found with like really fine sifting. Some people use like microscopes and stuff, looking
Hmm.
for those through micromatrix. But
I
cookie
love
cutter
little
teeth,
stuff. I feel like you know that about me by now. I just love like the little tiny stuff. So, and that is totally something that I tend to when I'm looking, I would probably miss like a megalodon tooth, but find a cookie cutter shark tooth.
one other cool thing about some of the cookie cutter shark teeth, the fossil ones, is a lot of them can be translucent. Like I had one from France that you could see like all of the vascular canals of the tooth, and the enameloid itself is almost just transparent, like very
Yeah.
fine.
You posted that tooth, I think, on your Instagram page, and I have it saved in my Instagram because it is just one of the most gorgeous teeth that I think I've ever seen. And yeah, you can just totally see all of these like look like it looks like it's covered in little veins on the inside. It's
Yeah.
just gorgeous.
Yeah, that is a really unique feature with squaliform teeth. And especially when you look at teeth that are that thin, you can get some really interesting preservation on
Absolutely.
them. Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the phylogeny of these bioluminescent squaliforms.
I feel like you probably know the phylogeny a lot more than I do. You are the taxonomic tree guru. So I might have you go for that because I am more of an extant shark person than you are.
Mhm. Yeah, so if we look at these bioluminescent squaliforms, like I said before about them being around in the late Cretaceous, there's been some, I guess, controversy surrounding the evolution of bioluminescence, where it used to be thought that I believe the Dalatiids and the Etmopterids evolved bioluminescence convergently, that it wasn't
Mhm.
linked. But when we look at the fossil record of these teeth, and now we know about the velvet dogfish having bioluminescence, and that being within Somniosidae, you have this clade that has bioluminescence, at least to some degree, within at least a member of every single one of those, which I think really indicates that this was a plesiomorphic trait that all members of this clade had, rather than it being something that was evolved several times independently, and that the animals that don't have the bioluminescence were likely animals that lost that trait rather than the other ones gaining it.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like that to me makes sense just because, they are all squaliforms and, the way they show their, the morphology kind of their photophores and things like that are fairly similar. So that really would make sense to me.
Yeah. And they're really really unique animals too. And all of these groups, they have that I guess more derived squaliform tooth structure with those apicobasally extended tooth bases, and a lot of them have the tooth itself extending down too, especially labially.
Yep.
So these teeth are all interlocked laterally, with the exception of the Trigonognathus, which is just a complete outlier
They are such an
morphologically.
outlier. Like they are just so weird. And also their denticles are different than a lot of the other Hemipterids. I've been trying to get, so that is on one of my bucket list specimens for our ichthyology collection because we don't have one and I want one so badly. If anyone watching wants to give me One of these guys, I'd really love one. But yeah, they just are nothing like them. It's just, superficially, if you're looking at the body and don't, open the mouth, I could see someone being like, "Oh yeah, they're the same." No. They're so strange.
Hmm. They really are. They're the most alien looking shark alive today. Like I would put that on
Mm.
one of the I guess like I would compare that with some of the alien looking Paleozoic chondrichthyans, and I would still think that the viper dogfish was weird.
It's funny that you say alien because I actually gave a talk a while back at Harvard on deep sea sharks. It was like why it was deep sea sharks, why are they so weird? And
Mhm.
my slide for these guys, the viper dogfish, was actually one next to the xenomorph that's seen in Alien, where Sigourney Weaver is kind of like pressed up against the wall, and the xenomorph is standing right in front of her with its little like mouth monster sticking out of her. So I had those photos side by side. So yeah, aliens.
Yeah, it really does get weird the deeper you go, a lot of
Yes.
these animals.
Yeah.
And And let's talk about some of the threats that these bioluminescent sharks may face, whether that's like man-made threats or if that's I guess predation from other animals.
hmm
What are some of the things that they deal with?
So obviously they're not dealing with a lot of the same pressures that we're seeing in like shallow water sharks. Like, it's very famous to talk about, sharks being hunted for meat and for, their fins and things like that. So, but because these sharks, aren't as accessible as, these, shallow water sharks that are easy to find. So a lot of times we know their migration routes. Um, that's not really possible with deep sea sharks. The only time they're really ever brought up for fishing, like catches, is when fishermen are fishing really deep and fishing at night. So there really isn't much of a trade for them. Um, Granted, but when they are caught, it's usually caught as bycatch. So it was like an accidental, a lot of fishing nets, they're just catching things indiscriminately. Um, so I mean, it's not to say that there's not a threat from fishing pressures, but it's just not as big a threat because they're not being as targeted. Um, to me, something that I mentioned it before, I think a big possible threat could eventually be, if it isn't already, is that we just don't know how many there are of a given species, because we can't see them, and when we catch them, it's just these one-off kind of bycatch situations. And if we don't know, the only way basically any policy can happen is by knowing the statistics of how many there are and what, how they're what their niche is and how that's, affecting, the other kind of animals in different trophic levels. So there never any protection is really going to be able to be put on any of these species if we don't know how many there are, and there's no way for us to know. So
Hmm.
but a lot of them we don't know what really their predators are like, because when it comes to deep sea sharks, a lot of them are small, but I don't know what else is necessarily eating them. I'm sure whatever is eating any other, fish their size is probably also eating them. But again, that's probably not something that's been documented but very well, because um you'd have to have someone who's looking at stomach contents of all of these things and counting up if there's any deep sea sharks in their bellies.
Yeah. No, I would imagine that being pretty rare, and I don't think that things like sperm whales are actively targeting sharks that big.
I wouldn't imagine so. And those are the things that can get to them, and I doubt that they're going down there looking for little lantern sharks.
Yeah. And even large animals can still go untraced within the deep sea. Like when we think about the megamouth, for example, that was only described in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
That's really not that long ago that we had
No.
no idea that that thing existed.
Yep.
It's one of the largest sharks alive today.
And it was actually believed for a while that they were bioluminescent. So megamouth sharks on their lower jaw, they have around like right behind what you call their lips, I guess. They have a really wide white band. And they were thinking that it was possible that that was bioluminescent, and it aided in basically them being able to just swim around with their mouth open and just have other fish just swimming into their mouth. Um, Kind of similar to like how an anglerfish will use a lure. It's just, come on in, guys. But now they're thinking, they've basically said that that's not bioluminescent, but it still be could performing a similar function of maybe that high contrast is attracting possible prey right into their mouth while they swim around looking like how they look.
Mm.
If you haven't seen what a mega mouth shark looks like, go look it up because they, I think, we've talked about some of the weirdest looking sharks. I think they're probably the silliest looking shark.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
what's really cool about the megamouth too is the earliest megamouths that we know of in the fossil record, they have very sand tiger-like teeth,
mhm.
which is really cool. And it makes sense when we look at it phylogenetically that they would
Mhm.
have that. But if you just saw a megamouth, you would never think that that was had like any relation to a sand tiger.
Mhm. There was actually a video filmed kind of recently of a man who was diving and it was super dark and this mega mouth shark just like cruised like right over his shoulder. It was like surreal and also how, I mean, so rare because yeah, they are primarily deep sea sharks. So the fact that this like guy was in the vicinity of a mega mouth shark and then just happened to, have it swim right over his shoulder, I would have. I mean, they're not dangerous to us, but that would certainly be terrifying to have this incredibly large animal swim right over your
Yeah.
shoulder.
Yeah. And for people that don't know, so the megamouth is a filter feeder, and filter feeders like the megamouth, the basking shark, the whale shark, they still have teeth, even though they don't use them like what most sharks do. It's still present. It's not like they have just like soft gums.
Right. Yeah, they definitely have teeth. They're, if I were to run my hand over them, it would hurt. I'd lose some skin, but yeah, they're not using them like the way that other animals are basically using their teeth. Like you said, they're just filter feeders and their teeth
Mhm.
are small.
Yeah. Doesn't the megamouth also eat small fish too?
Mhm. Yeah, so that was like probably I think I think as far as kind of those large deep sea sharks, they're not as scavengery as like we see with like the Greenland shark. They're a little more active than Greenland sharks are. I mean, I think their eyesight's a lot better too. I don't know how great their eyesight is though. I'm not sure. But yeah, I have heard that they do also eat fish.
Hmm. Well, their eyesight has to be better than the average
Oh
Greenland.
yeah, anything has to be better. My my stapler probably has better eyesight.
So the last question before we wrap this up is something I like to ask everyone that's on the show, and that is if you were to make one discovery or learn one thing in your lifetime, what would that one thing be?
Oh my goodness. That's like the hardest question. I guess if I were to say, like, on a grandiose scale, I would like to know the one trick that I could do to make everyone interested in the stuff we're interested in. So, like, see how great and awesome nature is and bio and just like, just evolution and the animals that we have now, but not just, and all the animals of the past. If I were to get really, really, really specific, and we're talking about deep sea sharks, something that I'd be most interested in is how their ampullae of Lorenzini, so those little pores that they have that are help them feel magnetic fields and changes in magnetic fields. I'd be interested in how deep sea shark ampullae differ from shallow water shark and kind of how the patterns are changed and dispersed.
Hmm.
If we're getting super specific to things probably most people don't care about.
Yeah, but your first one would get them to care.
Yep, there we go. See, that's all encompassing. It's like
Yeah.
asking the genie for unlimited wishes.
It really is a shame that not as many people I feel like care about, I guess, the natural world as what was before. And then if we look
Hmm.
at jobs, it's definitely contracting within paleontology. I'm sure it's the same within biology, marine biology too. It just seems like there's less of a focus on those type of things because they're like quote unquote non-essential. But
Yeah.
what we really strive for with science and as scientists is just building understanding and I guess fostering curiosity
Hmm.
because we have
Absolutely.
to, yeah, we have to think about the world around us and try and figure out how that works on a like a whole scale, not just what I guess is commercially viable or not, but just everything because everything's all intertwined.
Exactly. It's all like a house of cards. You pull out one, even if it's something that we don't think is really important, like no one likes mosquitoes, but there's a reason we have them. Every little building block is important. And I think it's so sad that people think of it as like, non-essential. I kind of got into like a real hyper fixation on Jeopardy questions a while back, and I dedicated way too much time into analyzing like the statistics of like the answerability of questions, and I found that people avoid the biology questions, and people like a lot of times it will be the last category to even be touched, and the ratio of getting them wrong and right, it was just remarkable. These really kind of grade school level biology questions, people were just getting stumped.
Mhm.
Really sad.
It is, yeah. I'll definitely say that I've seen similar trends too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll
Not to get depressing on us. Deep sea sharks, yay.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us and talking about glow-in-the-dark sharks. For everyone that has watched this far, I know you love sharks, so please like, comment, subscribe, and stay updated for more shark-related content because there really isn't much content for people that like truly are passionate about sharks on the internet. So yeah, show us your support and we'll catch you guys next time.